I'm Kim. I'm married to an addict alcoholic.
Hi, Kim. My name's Chris, and I am an addict alcoholic.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. Today we're going to have a call-in.
Is this person anonymous?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
They're open to having their name out there. Morgan. She's going to be sharing her experience with us and what sobriety looks like to her. And I'm excited to have this conversation. Any updates?
I had my first craving the other day.
What do you mean?
So I haven't had like a craving or like a desire, and I was at Target and I was walking by and I saw these really cool looking barbecue sauces, and it said Moscow Mule, and my brain went and brought me to like that cold. I had one Moscow Mule. It was like a cranberry Moscow Mule, and it was the most delicious drink I've ever had. And my mind went to that, and I was like, yeah.
Interesting. Was it pretty fleeting or?
Yeah. I mean, until I had left the Target. So it was hanging in there for a while. And then I think it was mostly, it's like the ginger beer that gives you that, like, I'm like, maybe if I just drank a ginger beer. And I was like, I don't really, like, because we would drink diet ginger beer. Yeah. And I'm like, I really don't want to buy ginger beer.
Yeah.
Because why I drink soda is because there's caffeine. Ginger beer is not going to give me any caffeine. So,
yeah.
So that was...
That's interesting.
I saved that for the podcast. It was very interesting because I've driven by signs and I've driven around. I've seen things, and that was the first time where I'm like, whoa.
I'm glad you were able to stay sober and fight those demons. It's not fun. Congratulations.
I hit 6 months sobriety. Yay.
That's a big milestone.
It is.
In the recovery world, like they say that's the big one. If you can make it 6 months, then it gets easier from there.
Then I can start running 5 miles.
I think so.
Oh, okay. I'll give that a try. See if I can make it a mile.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
All right. You ready?
I guess.
All right. Let's do this. Hey, Morgan.
Hi, how are you doing?
I am well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good tonight.
That's fantastic. Morgan, we met at the Nordic Brewing, I believe.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Fellow comedian, open micer. How long have you been doing stand-up for?
Like technically 6 or 7 years, but it wasn't until this past year that I was really kind of going to every show possible. Wow,
that's awesome. So, I mean, writing for that long is a pretty big feat, I would say.
Yeah, I actually started writing a lot in like 1st and 2nd grade for poetry. And then I did musicals for many years. So comedy kind of happened by accident. It just kind of all fell into place.
Wow, wow, wubsy, as we say. That's awesome. So I initially, we were going to have you on our like normal podcast to like block stuff up. But you had reminded me that you are in recovery yourself.
Yes, I am. I am a sex addict or sexaholic, and I've been sober for 4 years now.
That world is totally new to me. I mean, obviously, we know that people can be addicted to anything, but I'm curious as to... When do you recognize? Well, let's start at the beginning, I should say. So, what was childhood like for you?
Yeah, so I'm actually a Korean adoptee. So I was adopted at 4 months from Seoul, South Korea, directly into Minnesota. So basically, I grew up here, and for the most part, my parents have always been very supportive of me. Like learning about adoption and stuff like that. I went to a Korean adoptee culture camp in summers for a lot of my childhood. And then, unfortunately, adoption agencies don't say, hey, you just adopted a child who's a different color than you. People are probably going to treat them differently. They really tell parents, of course, treat them like you would a biological child, which makes sense to some degree. But unfortunately, if you treat me like a white child, and I go to school and all the white children they treat me like an Asian girl, which is very different. And so that's kind of, how things started, how I grew up a little bit different.
That's very interesting. I never thought about that. Yeah. So as far as like your heritage and things like that, do you remember them talking about that at all when you were growing up?
Not really. They mostly sent me, it's like a 5 to 6 day summer camp, from I think kindergarten and mostly every summer until like high school. When you start at that point, you're like a volunteer there, not just a camper.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that was the extent of it. It was mostly those days at camp. And then after that in college, they supported me to do some university in Korea as well.
Do you know your family or?
Yeah, so I started birth searching when I was 19 and I'm now 29. So it's been a while. I actually haven't been able to find direct mother and father type of family at all in the search. So when I went there for university, it was really just to, have my first trip there and do school there and learn culture. I've done the DNA testing with 23andMe, so I do have third cousins, one of which I've met one time, but that's as close as it's really gotten.
Wow, I can't imagine. So, I mean, that in itself is incredibly impressive, and that's great that your parents supported that. And wow, so now you'd kind of alluded to the way that if you're not raised to kind of be aware of the way that children treat you or may treat you because of the color of your skin, that can kind of create a tense dynamic. What was that like?
Yeah, so I think more people know now that a lot of Black American children, their parents teach them how to act around white people, how to act around cops, and really, just how to act in different other, minority cultures. So with me, my parents were just act like a white kid. I mean, they didn't say that; they just raised me like that. So when I would go to school, I mean, even at daycare, when I, before kindergarten, kids were very aware of my race and would let me know. So when we'd play house, I was never mom or dad. I was always something like Princess Jasmine, because that made sense to other kids when we're, that young. And then kindergarten, through my entire education, really, and, in the work field as an adult, definitely people treat me as an Asian woman. So they're surprised that I'm a bit more outgoing than they would expect. I'm not very submissive. And then, sexually, people are quite aggressive. And it's strange that it's been like that since I was a kid.
I hate to ask it this way, but oftentimes there's trauma associated with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assume that as a former sex addict or sex addict in recovery, that trauma may have played a role in your life as well.
Definitely. Yeah, I think sex addiction is kind of commonly seen as something that men in places of authority say to cover up that they're a cheater. I think if someone honestly is a chronic cheater, or chronically looking at porn or masturbating, that's generally what sex addicts are mostly known as. And when you go to meetings, it's mostly that type. So for me, yeah, I mean, it is a bit different. I was hypersexualized as a child, and that's kind of eventually how the addiction formed. So when I was in fourth grade, I was going to like a nice public school in Minnesota. And I wasn't the class clown quite yet, but this other kid was, and he physically assaulted me on the playground. And no one said or did or anything. He just came up and grabbed my chest one day in the playground and squeezed really hard. I had bruising from it. And he just kind of laughed and said, I thought Asians were supposed to be flat. And then like a couple of weeks later, my mom was like, oh yeah, we should get you a training bra, because it was just that age and that time. But he knew it, I guess, before it was realized by myself or by my family. And that's how he pointed it out to everyone. So that was, kind of the first of it. And it was really the first time I had ever heard of, how an Asian woman's body should look, I guess. So it was weird that he was teaching me these stereotypes that I had never heard before.
Man, God, I hate that, because the first thing I think of is our kids. And when you talk about the whole training bra thing, my nieces are going through that. My own daughter has been introduced to that now, and I can't imagine what I would do if I knew that had happened. It's freaking awful.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going on later on in life, so having forced to be made aware of, this physical aspect of yourself that you now have to be on guard about. Was there a point that it turned into, oh, that must be what guys want?
Oh, definitely. I think a lot of Asian Americans especially kind of fall into being the token with their friends. So this definitely made me think like, oh, if a guy thinks I'm pretty, it's because I'm Asian. So I should always ask if he likes Asian girls, or does he have a fetish for Asian girls? It got to the point that I was so accepting of this hypersexualized, super racist role that I would my nickname was the Asian, and I gave that to myself, and I sewed it in as patches onto my own clothes and hoodies and stuff like that. But it probably wasn't until college or so that I realized that I didn't want to date anyone that solemnly was interested because of that, because time and time again they had very clear expectations of what they expected from an Asian woman that I didn't fit and didn't want to portray those ideas.
Wow. This is a whole new world to me. I'm trying to think of how to even, I just, the empath in me is freaking out. So when it comes to relationships then, did you have relationships where you felt like it was more than just this kind of novelty, and that there was something deeper?
Probably not until the last handful of years. Dating guys who fetishize you, obviously they don't respect you. To some degree, they are actually racist. And that really just falls you into a crowd of dating guys who eventually are quite abusive. So I dated a few dudes in particular long-term who were really physically and emotionally abusive. And it was really a lot of it stemming, from their own mental illnesses, of course, but how they viewed Asian women. And so once I was able to finally break that cycle and was able to, hook up with people who respected me and respected my body, and we didn't have that type of racial expectation, eventually, that kind of having my own body positivity spiraled into the real sex addiction, because I had been going for since my childhood of having that expectation of like racist, abusive sex. And then once I finally broke the cycle, I realized I didn't actually eliminate that from my life because I didn't know how to function without it. So there was a few years of like full-blown sex addiction, hooking up with people who are consenting adults, of course, but I'm replacing, sleeping with multiple men a week or a night because I'm no longer being controlled by just one person.
Oh, wow.
So once I was able to get help for that and go through the steps and really be clean of it, and obviously, you're always in recovery. Once I was able to do that, then I was able to have a couple of relationships that were with healthy, kind of normal, positive people.
Shame is often associated with addiction, and especially when somebody kind of first makes you aware of the fact that what you're doing isn't like everybody else, or what they think is not like everybody else. So you start to hide these aspects of yourself. Mm-hmm. Do you remember a moment when maybe you had opened up to somebody about kind of the explorations that you have or the things that you were viewing, and they made you feel lesser than because of those things?
Oh, definitely. I went out with someone who I actually had known back in high school, and we were kind of friends then. So after all of this, when I was in a much healthier place, we went out for a bit, and he actually broke up with me after like a handful of dates. He wanted to cut it off because he said I could never be a good mother or a good wife.
Oh, wow.
Jesus.
Which I thought was kind of tragically unfair.
Yeah, it's another aspect of addiction that people don't really realize, because when you perpetuate these stereotypes like that bullshit I've heard before, promiscuity means that you're incapable of loving children and having any kind of responsibility, which is complete bullshit. Mm-hmm. But that aspect of like when people come upon these certain things or have what they feel to be realizations, rather than saying like, hey, I care about you, I just want to make sure that you know that further down the line, I would love to have a family. Does that seem like something you would want? Mm-hmm. And instead they say bullshit like that can make things worse. Not that that's what happened to you, but that type of thinking is absolutely what can make things worse for people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. People have a lot of misconceptions about it. And I mean, honestly, even in the circle of people who are sex addicts, when, we had in-person meetings and stuff, no one ever did anything weird really to make me feel uncomfortable. I was just uncomfortable in the space because when I would go, more often than not, to any particular day or place, they would always want me to give some sort of testimony or background, because it gives a lot of the men there that are sex addicts in different ways kind of a face to people that they've used in the past or abused in the past. Mm. So that's always interesting. There's like never a dry eye in the house, actually, whenever I talk about my story with them, just because, the girls in the pictures that they would download all the time, or, women that they would hook up with, who had multiple partners and stuff, they realize that, they probably weren't healthy too.
Oh, I see. I mean, this... God, Kim Duke, you got anything to say?
I don't know.
It's a lot to take in, and I'm so glad that you're willing to talk about this stuff.
How long did your addiction go on for?
Yeah, there was a solid 3 years where it was like kind of the very clear marks of it being, instead of like sexual freedom, of it being very unhealthy.
Something that like happened to me when I was like going through recovery, well, obviously I'm still going through it, but in the early stages of it, was looking back on, because you forget while you're in active use some of the stuff that you were doing before. And then when you have this kind of these sober weeks, I'll say substance. Yeah, it's still substance abuse. You don't realize that that's what was happening, or those things that were leading up to it. So were there things that like you didn't realize, and then later on were like, oh wow, I didn't know. I would not have guessed that that's a sign.
Oh yeah, definitely. I would I would like go on a lot of online dates, of course, which, you know, being a millennial, being only 29, to me is like very normal. But I would be going on a lot of online dates, and you know, I think people who are comfortable with it are okay with going out, you know, once or twice a week to get drinks or coffee or something with someone new each time. And honestly, I know people who just serial date first dates pretty much. And you know, it's fairly normal. So when I had broken the cycle of abuse and, you know, gotten away from my worst abuser, I thought like, hey, this is great. You know, I'm participating in normal dating and hookup culture. Yes means yes, no means no. Everyone's a consenting adult. But I didn't realize that when I was going on multiple dates, it was to fill the void of the multiple days that someone would be controlling me or hooking up, you know, with multiple people in a night, really filled up kind of this space of, you know, my last partner would like abuse me for an entire evening. I thought I was doing the most normal, like almost like all American girl, like millennial thing.
Sure.
But for me, it was actually kind of, you know, replacing the abuse with me abusing myself.
It seems though, and I don't think that people think about this enough, but so would you objectify men kind of looking back on it?
Oh, for sure. You know, I was definitely at a point, especially during those 3 years, where so in my phone, it would be like someone's first name and then their height and like if their dick was good or not. And then like keywords so I could remember who that was.
Oh.
I would always try and take a photo of someone, either like a screenshot from their profile or like the night that we meet with them, because I would not remember who these people are.
Wow. At any point, did you become kind of the thing that had kind of broken you down, in the sense of like, I've never been with a Hispanic man. I've never been with twin brothers, like things like that?
No.
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't. I think I had more so like, if anything, everyone was more similar than like, it wasn't like a bingo list. It was more one checklist that you had to fill.
So it was more in the sense that you knew what you would be able to get out of a person like, you know, that checks off all these certain boxes. And so you would look for that type of person to fulfill that need. Yeah,
it was probably more like a few check boxes on like their intelligence and how they looked, and then a lot of check boxes of things that could not be. Because, you know, I was still in the mindset that like, I'm not being abused. Like, this is consensual. This is normal behavior. It might be a little on the extreme side of how much I was going out and hooking up, but it was still, to me, in the world of normal. You know, I could have been like a host or like character for like BuzzFeed or something like that. Is more so how I was viewing, you know, my attitude towards it. So it would be things like they can't be a virgin, they can't be recently out of a long-term relationship, they can't be cheating at all, you know, stuff like that. I didn't want to hurt other people or other people overreach themselves.
Mm. And you had brought up that cheating aspect earlier. In the relationships that you were in, did you ever cheat, or was it more that you had been cheated on?
I was pretty heavily cheated on, in like different ways. And I did emotionally cheat once, which, I think in junior high, someone cheated on me, and not that it's ever okay, but honestly, in a very like your 2 week junior high relationship, and they went on an accidental group date with another girl, it's not the end of the world. And then my high school sweetheart of many years, the last year that we were together, it was very much like I would try to break up with him all the time, and he would not let me. It was a very manipulative situation, and like it did get a little physically abusive at the end. But that whole last year, I found out he had been cheating on me on like a near daily basis with someone else.
Oh, wow.
And then, as far as I know, it wasn't until kind of my worst abusive relationship in my very early 20s, he cheated on me all the time. But the thing with him, why I like would say that he's the most abusive is also he unfortunately was like a serial rapist, and
Jesus.
right, and his like mom was aware of this. It was the most crazy thing I would think would be in like a VC Andrews book or something. It was such a dark family, such a dark place to be in, and I saw him for like 2 to 3 years. But he would go out and either actually hook up with or like assault another woman. I didn't find out that he was assaulting them until later because someone found me on Facebook and told me what he did to her. But he would go out and like, he was an alcoholic. He would get drunk. He would go to the clubs. You know, he would either actually hook up or assault someone, tell me about it. And I'd be so mad that he cheated on me.
Man.
And then it was during one of those relationships, a guy friend would reach out to me and check on me all the time because he knew it was bad. And then he started like, you know, flirting, saying that, you know, I'm beautiful and how much he cares about me. And I would totally go with this conversation and accept it. And it was definitely like emotional cheating. And I would never say any type of cheating is okay. But honestly, I probably wouldn't take it back. Because even though when my partner found out and was very upset, and I feel bad about, you know, hurting him emotionally like that. If I didn't have someone in my ear giving me like a positive like perspective of myself and of the situation, I don't know if I would have been able to like ever leave it.
Oh man, I just, that cycle of, and it goes back to that cycle of abuse is, you know, when we get in these dark places, we kind of think, well, of course this would happen to me, or of course this would happen because not that this is what I deserve, but this is just a product of my environment now.
Yeah, I think like sex addiction is a lot of product of your environment, similar to substance abuse. Like I know a lot of people that are addicted to different substances. And it wasn't just like, oh, they tried weed one time and like things spiraled, you know. It was definitely like a friend or family member was also struggling with that addiction and like in a way made it okay for them to start trying things. Or maybe they like forced them to do it with them, or they had to be around it all the time growing up. And, you know, it becomes normal to do this thing that you know is bad for you or you know isn't okay.
Crap, what was I going to ask? Another scary thing that I learned when I was in treatment when it comes to sex and love addicts is that there are people who will go to meetings in a predatory fashion.
Oh, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, were there people that tried to take advantage of what they found out about you?
There was only one time someone made me feel uncomfortable. I was on a phone call meeting years ago. I I do sound quite young on the phone, especially, and one of the guys just like interrupted me and said, "You have the cutest voice," and people kind of uncomfortably laughed. And then the guy leading said, "Yeah, let's keep those types of compliments to ourselves, and like maybe not even view that as a compliment, and we just don't say them."
Yeah.
And the guy was like, "No, it's fine. Like, she knows she sounds cute. She sounds so young. Like, how old can you be?" And he was almost, guys a lot of time hit on me like they're talking to a child, which I think is so creepy.
That is super creepy. People, sorry, Kim had to answer the door real quick, but people would hit on her basically because she sounded like a child.
Oh.
And so, God.
Yeah. And so I immediately just hung up the phone, and then I never used that particular Zoom meeting like day and time ever again. So I have no idea how they handled that other than when they first cut him off and said like, "No, let's not do that."
Yeah.
Because I just hung up, and then the person leading it, they obviously, there's not a lot of women. And the only people that have my contacts kind of in this community is a handful of people, and they're only women. So he contacted a couple of women that, he would assume I'd be in contact with to just reach out and say like, "Hey, they had talked to that guy and, feel welcome to like ever come back." But I got the message, but yeah, probably not going to go back there ever.
Yeah. So I know like with other addictions too, people have their like rock bottoms. When was the time that you realized what was the moment where you kind of realized you had a problem, or was it kind of in your head the whole time, but you couldn't kind of navigate?
Yeah. So with the sex addiction, was obviously not being like fulfilled by all these different hookups. And I started playing this game at bars where, I was also like, it was the age where you would go to bars all the time anyways. But me and my friends would go to a bar, and I would see how many people I could hook up with at that bar, inside of the bar, like that night.
Oh, wow.
Because that's a normal thing to do. Nobody does that. That's super messed up. If you hook up in a bar, you don't stay there, and then you definitely don't try and find other people. So I would like play this game, like, kind of against myself all the time. And then after like a couple of months of doing that, I went on, I think one was a Tinder and one was an OkCupid date. So I went on this Tinder date at night, and it was like the first evening that we had matched. I like left the party to like go meet him, and then we ended up hooking up like multiple times in one night. And for me, like, my lower half was like quite like raw at that point. And like I was still having fun, but like, those were like abrasions. Like I had hurt myself. And I mean, he wasn't really aware of it because I didn't say anything. And then like we were up so late the next morning, we slept in, and it was like, I think past noon or something when I woke up, and I freaked out because I had to like get dressed, go home, like shower, and then get dolled back up again because I was supposed to have like an earlier date with another new person. And so I like rushed out of there. I like did all that at home, and I went on this other date. And then it was definitely supposed to be like a date where we like get coffee, and then he actually lives above the coffee shop. We're just like, if things are fine, we're going to go hook up upstairs. So then I was like, things are going fine. We have to go hook up upstairs. And I obviously have like not healed at all. So I had like sex with another person, and I just remember it being like pretty excruciating. and him, of course, not having any idea because I did not say anything.
Wow.
And then I had therapy like later that week, and I was telling her about it, and I started crying because I couldn't figure out why I would hook up with someone so much that, you know, it wasn't like fun. I was definitely super injured. And then why on earth would I rush to go do it again?
Wow.
That was kind of the biggest bottom point in the realization of like playing the game was kind of its own thing of me questioning, is this a normal, sane thing to do? But after those 2 dates, I knew that there was something seriously wrong.
So how did you start looking up sex addiction at that time, or what kind of happened from there?
My therapist actually said it. She said that it felt like I had really crossed over from this like stance of empowerment to I clearly am not in control anymore. And it's not like there was an individual who was abusing and controlling me. And that clearly I was at this point replacing all of that with these, you know, random individuals. And while it may have been like a fun, healthy interaction for them, you know, no one wants to find out later that person they hooked up with was like abusing themselves with them. So at that point I stopped hooking up and I went to my first meeting, and I hadn't even really looked up sex addiction online. She had just given me like a couple of days and times addresses that could work with my schedule. And she's like, honestly, you can just tell them that you're not even sure about it yet and that you just want to like sit in, experience it. But hearing these guys talk and, you know, reading the book with them, I realized that I fit in there, and that what they felt like uncontrollable, like urges and choices and where they were coming from was exactly what I was doing. They might be doing it, you know, masturbating, you know, touching themselves or chronically cheating or watching pornography. I just, I don't know, wasn't in their position, you know, I could go do that physically with someone.
And I just remember this, but there was a podcast that I did a while ago, but when he and I were talking, I had mentioned, and I've said it on here before, but there was porn, and I was a chronic cheater too. It was not good. And then when that had stopped, this guy pointed out that my drinking went up. And so I had gone from so cross addiction is a pretty big thing too, in that your brain is still wired for addiction and that dopamine kick and that, I call it hunter-gatherer sense. Like, I don't know what else to call it, but the seeking aspect is just as addictive as having the actual thing. And I remember that feeling so strong, like digging through piles of garbage to find porno, like old porno mags, and not even masturbating to them, just feeling like I had to go and find these things, and like that feverish. So when you said you like jumped up and knew that you had to get to the other thing, I know that feeling all too well. And that's awesome that you went and found help rather than like trying to quit and then drowning it in something else.
It's interesting. So like listening to you talk too, you know, we talk about traumatic events happening. I was sexually assaulted when I was younger. And then immediately after that, I felt this loss of control. Like I didn't have control over what had happened. And this sounds terrible, and I haven't openly talked about it, but immediately after that, I went and slept with 4 virgins just so I could take something from them because something got taken from me. And I didn't care who they were. I'm like, okay. And then it became, like it was this trying to find something like, oh, are you a virgin? Oh, and then and it wasn't even, it sounds so terrible. It wasn't even pleasurable. it was just like, I'm going to take that from you. Something got taken from me. And then when you talk, there were moments where throughout my early, even later adolescence, I would feel that loss of control. And then there were times where there was one night where I slept with 3 different guys in the same night because I felt like I couldn't control anything, but I can control their desire towards me. And then I would leave one place and go to another. And even in that time, like, I obviously didn't experience as nearly as bad as you, like the physical trauma, but in the end, it wasn't even pleasurable. It was just that I need to get it. I can control what's going on, and then I'm done and I can leave.
Exactly. Yeah. That just reminded me there was a time where, like, during this, where there'd be maybe like a handful of people who were not like steady that I was seeing them, but they were like fuck buddies and we were like all aware. But there was one who like told me like he just got this new roommate with like a crazy name, and his other like roommate is like an asshole named Joe. Like, and then and we would like hook up like at this house all the time. And then one day, serial dating, it was like second or third date I was out on or something like from that morning to that evening. So I'm like out with this guy and I'm like, you know what? This guy, Joe, he's got it. And so I think I drove us to his place, and he's like, oh yeah, I have this roommate in the basement. And I was like thinking, oh, wouldn't it be funny if it's that guy I hook up with? But like, what are the chances? And then he just got this roommate with this crazy name. And then at one point, like, he realized that he wasn't giving me directions. I was just driving him to the house at that point because I knew where he lived in a non-serial killer way. And I was like, hey, like, your housemate is like one of my fuck buddies, so let's not do this because like that's weird. And I think that was like, someone like fit the, had all the check boxes, the do's and don'ts. And then at the last minute, I was like, it wasn't even like, I don't want to hurt myself by like creating like a bad situation for myself or other people. It was like, I have to like protect my fuck buddy because, doing this could wreck his life. And like that's obviously something you should think about if you're hooking up. But I had like no regard to like how that could affect me doing that and like starting something with other people. It was such a strange thing to happen. And then because I didn't hook up with anyone that day, I just called someone else, on the list of like fuck buddies that I was like, they must be available. And then I went and hooked up with them instead. Like, it was so replaceable.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's physical harm that can befall any addict, but in the realm of sex addiction, were there any close calls as far as STDs or any other diseases that you later found out that somebody that you had been with had contracted? So
I'm super lucky. Unless it was someone I really knew, it was, always with a condom. Like, even if you're in a long-term relationship or married, like, technically, it's recommended to be tested every 3 months. And I would be tested like every other month at a clinic. And then, if they hadn't been tested in a while or, no matter how long, like I had been hooking up or seeing that person, no glove, no love. And what's funny is I never had like an STD or pregnancy scare with them either. So I was super lucky with that. I know a lot of sex addicts that, had a lot of pregnancies, whether they kept them or not, and then a lot of STDs. So with my therapist, guesstimating on like, the months that I know was super high in hookups, and then from like my old like Verizon like phone lists and stuff like that. And the people I do remember, we kind of guesstimate that this also includes like at least 10 boyfriends, but like about like 300-ish people that I've hooked up with, the majority of which if I saw them on the street, I would not recognize them. So I'm so lucky that, I didn't get any sort of STD or STI, that I didn't have a pregnancy scare with anyone, or, got directly pregnant at all. So that, I don't know, that was like the one thing that I was diligent about, I guess.
That's great. Even if that's the one thing, that's because, recovery is always something that's possible for people. And like I've said on here before, like the thing that sucks about recovery is it doesn't mean that everything's fixed just because you're sober. So if you had contracted something, sobriety is great. It protects you from things further down the road, but we're not always safe from our past actions. So that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
So with COVID and everything going on now, do you do like virtual do you still actively attend meetings? Do you usually just reach out to people that you've met in your groups and kind of talk with them? How are you still continuing on your path of sobriety?
Yeah, I'm really not a big meeting person, just because my story is like so like I don't want to be like, oh, I'm so tragic, but my story in general is like quite sad. And so going to meetings all the time, it's uncomfortable to some degree to constantly talk about it. Like I said, when I show up, they're like, sweet, let's talk about it. Because it's helpful for the guys, but to some degree, if I did it all the time, it would not be helpful for me anymore.
Yeah.
So generally, before COVID with meetings, I would really only go if I felt like I really needed a meeting.
Okay.
And then, if a friend needed support, I would go with them. And then otherwise it was honestly, getting my chip every year, which the first year I didn't even do because I still felt so like undeserving to some degree that I was like, is a year a real accomplishment or not? And then I finally started to like accept that like a one day is an accomplishment, Sorry to answer your actual question.
No, that's okay.
With COVID, I've definitely done like a handful of the phone call meetings. I have not done the video meetings just because I don't know why we're doing them for sex addicts. I think that's kind of weird.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, because I feel like, like you had mentioned, like meetings can be a place for predators. Even if I just had a plain white wall somewhere in the house, I don't know. I don't want someone to have a video or like an image of me.
Oh, well, yeah, that makes
wonder,
sense.
Like you were saying that there's fewer women who are come forward about that stuff, which sucks. That that one, it's the perception, right, of like our society is that women are better than men. You're not supposed to be disgusting. You're not supposed to do that stuff. And then on top of that, to have predators out there, it's that much harder, which fucking blows. And so I hope that, by you coming on here, it motivates people to, because I would say there are, like, especially in the Alcoholics Anonymous world, there are women only groups. And so I anybody who's listening, encourage you to look for women's only options, try to find strength and allies. And it could, because they had pointed out too that when men go to a meeting, they don't get dressed up, but women are expected to put their makeup on, to do their hair, and so just knowing that there are going to be men there, even if it doesn't feel like a big deal, there's still this expectation that, you're supposed to show up or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about your therapist was the one that pointed it out to you. Do you still see that therapist? Are you still engaging in therapy?
Yeah. I still do check-ins with her.
Yeah. Okay.
So if like it's been like a couple of months, I'll try and do like a couple sessions with her just to like check in. If something like super major happens, I'll start being regular for a bit.
So what have you learned that has been able to help people understand more when they hear sex addiction?
I do always try and like encourage people to understand that it's not like when they hear a celebrity is, a sex addict because they cheated on, their partner a lot. Yeah, that's a real thing. It's not just something that they're covering up. And I think men kind of get put in two categories of sex addiction, like, oh, they're like pigs because they hook up all the time, or they're like an incel and they like, just watch a ton of pornography and touch themselves. And I think boiling it down to that is so unfair to people. And it's probably why so many more people are sex addicts and probably don't know, because they're like, well, I'm not like, cheating on my partner because I'm trying to hurt someone all the time. Or, I'm not, I'm not just watching porn because I'm not dating someone. It's honestly so much more than that. And I think the more that people understand, like, how people get, like, kind of fall into the ritual of doing these things all the time to the point that suddenly you can't live without it as well is, kind of the larger issue. I think you've mentioned it on here before where like chemically can you really get addicted to marijuana based on what it's made out of? No, like scientifically we keep saying no, but you can definitely be addicted to marijuana. I think sex and pornography are the same thing.
Psychologically. Yeah. You get that.
Exactly.
Yep. You still have that craving and you almost still can withdraw. Like you can't physically withdraw from marijuana or pornography or sex, but there is some physical component. Like you're not going to get the sweats or tremors and stuff like that with you see with other like narcotics and alcohol, but there is some physical component to it with marijuana in sex and pornography. I mean, people who have shopping addictions, there's still going to be that physical withdrawal from it.
Yeah. Triggers don't just apply to snowflakes. Like people think that trigger is like some type of millennial construct, but it's a real applicable term towards anything that has become detrimental to a healthy lifestyle.
Like exercise, people can be addicted to exercise, and we look at exercise as something healthy, but there's an extent where you're exercising so much that it's not healthy anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I always encourage people, if you, it's kind of like, the way that my friends viewed me is I was like the fun, crazy friend that had all these silly sex stories and was always going out like fucking dudes and like, hooking up with people at bars and, I could go flirt with anyone. Like, I was that kind of like fun friend. And honestly, I mean, those people obviously exist. Like, people are sexually different, in so many ways to like be extroverted or introverted about it, whatever, that's fine. But honestly, if you ever like question why you're hooking up with someone, or if you hook up so often that like you feel physically like fatigued or injured by it, you're probably a sex addict. And even if you're not directly, there's obviously something going on that it wouldn't hurt to listen to a movie or read something. Because, that can stem into insight. And honestly, so the Sex Addicts like White Book is just called, the book. And then we have the bigger book, which actually is Alcoholics Anonymous. Our book, like a lot of other like non-substance addictions, are based on that book as well. So we often refer to it. And there's a lot of people who become sober from substances that become sex addicts. Like you had mentioned earlier, Chris, that people, find things to replace their addiction with.
Yeah, cross addiction.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of guys who are just like, oh, I'm a regular alcoholic. But my partner and I are going through this together, becoming sober, and they find that they become like physically addicted to each other in like a sexual way.
Sure.
So like anytime someone feels like an urge or gets a flashback or something, they end up having sex, and that is hurting their relationship because they're finding comfort, but they're not solving, the things that they're running into every day.
Yeah.
Right.
So it must be that what you talked about, that physical dopamine, like they're having that desire to drink. So they're going to increase their dopamine by having sexual relationships with each other.
Well, and a lot of people joke about this all the time, but how, especially like a lot of male comedians will joke about how they'll jerk off and then immediately feel horrible about themselves. Mm-hmm. You're internally realizing that you didn't need to do the thing that you just did. And goes the same thing for substance. Is as soon as you get drunk, oftentimes you're like, oh fuck, I'm drunk. And so like when you climax and then it's over and you're like, oh shit, I got the thing, but it hasn't made me feel better. It's not like for guys, I would say if that happens to you a lot, it's not like supposed to be a common thing. You shouldn't always feel bad after you're doing what you think is going to make you feel better.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess we didn't talk about that as much, but like, would you even climax when you were hooking up with people?
Oh no, like never. I really never had like a full orgasm with like a partner until after I got healthy.
Wow.
So like my early 20s when I, had my first like major healthy relationship, it wasn't until then. And that's probably because, the sex actually, it meant something to be close to someone physically. Mm-hmm. And for someone to accept me for kind of who I am versus like what I am or like what, physical service I'm essentially offering them. Like, to some degree, I was kind of like an unpaid sex worker who was just like, in my mind, like doing it because I love the sport. And then finding out later, I actually like hate this sport and it's super bad for me. And part of me is like, man, I wish I would have realized before, having hurt myself so many times that I actually didn't like it. I wasn't getting anything out of it. I was high while it was happening, and afterwards I was so low. And that really is what, people find like harder drugs, or they take larger doses, or do it more frequently, stuff like that. It's the same thing with this. I was hooking up with multiple people in an evening because I needed to like keep that high.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Absolutely. It makes sense. Yeah. It's that pattern of addiction, man. It's a real bastard.
Definitely.
So I mean, as far as advice for somebody who is on I mean, you've already kind of said it.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sherry kind of said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to, so any other imparting words that you'd like for people?
Thanks for sharing. I mean, you opened even my eyes up to sex addiction. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Great.
it's something that I've kind of glazed over it a couple of times, but yeah, it's something that pretty clearly was a part of my life, and when I thought I had it figured out, it just went right into another addiction. So that's another big role that these things play when it comes to getting sober.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely just say, like, if anyone feels like they're dealing with these like feelings or issues, um, you know, just Googling it. Like, I honestly think that's kind of the real first step nowadays.
Yeah.
Just Google it. I mean, you don't have to talk with everyone about it. Like, I'm so open about it at meetings and stuff. The guys are like, you're kind of a freak, right? Like, it's not normal for you to like post on Facebook, hey everyone, I'm a sex addict. I'm no longer going to be hooking up. Or like, I was celibate for a year after my first major breakup of like during sobriety because I was terrified I would go on a date and hook up with someone. I had like nightmares. So, honestly, like, if you're too scared to make people in your life aware about it at first, just Google it. Like, you reading something alone, especially during COVID, like, no one has to know right away. You have plenty of time to like figure out and explore things on your own.
I would imagine between you and a therapist is all the more people that ever need to know. I mean, until you find like a healthy relationship and you want them to know, but it's not something that you have to be forced onto a stage for sure.
Oh, definitely. There's plenty of people who, are like, I'm not religious. There's other people who are not religious. You can find steps and meeting programs for that don't involve any type of religion or spirituality. If you're not comfortable with groups, like you said, one-on-one with a therapist, it's totally possible. And nowadays, I mean, you don't even have to meet them or do a video chat. You can message with them if that's easier for you.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many ways to do it in a protected setting now that you don't necessarily need to feel exposed the whole time.
You could be sitting in your room eating hot Cheetos and bearing your soul.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, Morgan, thank you so freaking much for calling. This was, I'm sorry for the long pauses, but we were trying to like grasp everything. Yeah. Because for one, I hate hearing stories,
especially people's trauma.
Yeah. Like I could go on and on about that, but it's just, that was really, really great to hear. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. And I mean, asking what I think was totally great questions, for a type of addiction a lot of people don't know about, and, being welcoming, because honestly, a lot of people wouldn't want something like this, on their podcast, but, it's great that you guys are so supportive.
Yeah, well, we're just not cowards and we're amazing, so.
Of course.
All right, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you both. Bye-bye.
Bye. Did you text your dad back?
Yeah. What'd you say? The joke I was trying to make today, I thought of a funny joke. I texted him and I said, sorry for your loss. And he texts me back, how's your journal? I was like, what the? Why would you respond that way?
Anyway, let's get back to
I wanted him to say, what loss? And then I say, your hair.
Oh.
Sorry for your hair loss.
That's funny.
Thank you.
I feel like I learned a lot about sex addiction.
Yeah, man. I mean, okay, he got it. Yeah. And I forgot to tell you about that too, that the authentic podcast that I did, I had never made that connection that I had been like
replacing
addictions the whole time.
Yeah.
And that was, so that whole conversation reminded me of that.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Her talking about that too, like, made me question when I was younger and I was doing the things I was doing sexually. Like, was I experiencing some type of addiction at that point? Because like, I wasn't always finishing either. It was just like the thrill of getting it, finding it, getting it, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sad.
Yeah, it's
the human brain.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, man.
Yeah.
And I think even it's crazy to think that in our relationship we joked about how often we would have sex with each other. And who knows if that was healthy or not.
Yeah.
The amount that, like, the lengths that with which I would go to, and the lengths that you would go to just to do that and then go home.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad we had her on, because this
Absolutely.
is I feel like we talk a lot about substances and stuff like that. It's kind of nice to hear something that's an addiction that's not necessarily mind altering. That's a good way to put it.
People think that
I think people forget about exercise and shopping and stuff like that. That can be very addicting.
Yeah. Well,
but it's not a substance.
When we say it, I think people almost think that we're just kind of throwing arbitrary things out there and saying that you can be addicted to it. Those are real life things. Gambling is another one that's not mind altering.
No,
that you absolutely can be addicted.
There's
to.
a period before we got pregnant with Layla where I got very obsessed, addicted almost to counting calories, where I was at my lowest weight. I was tiny. I look back on pictures and I would know what calories were and everything. It's almost an eating disordered.
Yeah.
But I was obsessed and addicted to knowing how many calories I was taking in every day. That's not a substance, but it altered my mind all the time. Yeah. I got to the point where I could go through a drive-thru and knew what I could order so I wouldn't go over my amount of calories that I could have in a day. And knew how much I had to walk that evening to try and stay in my calorie range.
Yeah. There's anything, and I'm always saying it wrong, because anything
that can hinder your life is a good way to put it.
Yeah, but see, I always say detrimental, but it's when you become a danger to yourself or those around you. That's the phrase that they say. So if you become a danger to yourself or those around you by
having some sort of substance, mind altering,
whatever this
object. I don't know.
Activity.
There it is.
Whatever the activity is. That's an addiction. 100%. Yeah.
Man, we should look up My Strange Addiction. I mean, there's so many addictions on there.
Yeah, people laugh about that.
But it's not funny. These people, that's why I thought of the exercise thing too, because I watched the first episode. I think it was the first episode. This guy was addicted to running, and he was very sick.
His parents are trying to get him to stop.
Yeah, and then the girl that was addicted to tanning and all. I mean, it's interesting. I should look up what episodes they have, and just that way we can talk about them.
Yeah.
But all right.
Well, shit. That was great.
That was really good. That was a good episode.
Hey, I'm excited to go to IKEA with you Thursday.
Next week when we record, things might look different in here.
Things very well may look different.
So we're trying to change things up, make more of an inviting environment, especially when we talk about very serious things. Mm-hmm. So so people can feel more comfortable and all that. Sometimes having the table in the way and these chairs, you can't sit comfortably, but we don't want to make it feel like a therapist's office, but we want it more comfortable. Come and tell us your story and all that.
Come hang.
We might have to plug the mini fridge back in and allow people to have a Fiji water or something. Yeah. I don't know. But things are still kind of going up with COVID. If you feel comfortable coming into our home, we have tons of hand sanitizer. We clean.
My desk over there.
Where, if you feel like you want to be on the podcast anonymously, you can do that. We can do video or phone like we did. We can do that kind of stuff. So we are very open to having people because we learn things.
Yeah.
Constantly. I work in mental health. I work with people who are dependent on things, and I learned a lot during this podcast.
Yeah. And if there isn't an episode next week, I apologize, but my board is broken.
Yeah.
So if you saw Kim and I looking at each other weird in the first part of the episode, it's because things kind of sound weird in the
different
crap
headphones.
that I had to hook up.
Yeah, we weren't trying to look weird because of what we were hearing. The headphones and everything was kind of wonky. But
so,
all right. Well, with this, I'll pass. With this, we'll pass.
Who is Will?
Okay. What is that again?
And with that.
With that, we'll pass.
And with that, we will pass.
And with that, we will pass.
Good job.